Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Big Bros podcast. My name is Ilan and I'm joined by my lovely friend and co-host, Jeremy. How are you, mate?
I'm well. It's a lovely afternoon here. We've got our green teas, sipping away on a nice green tea on this cold winter day here in Melbourne because we are officially in the winter months. But I'm well, mate. Episode 18. Let's get involved.
It's
an interesting one, as you guys can see from the title. So let's dive into this. We did say on the Big Bros podcast when we commenced this journey that nothing would be off limits, that we'd be talking about all juicy, philosophical, fun, and zesty topics. And here we are. Here's one of them. Ilan, introduce it for us.
No worries. Today, guys, we'll be speaking about pornography. We're going to be speaking about the potential negatives of it, the potential positives of it. But rather, what we want to do with this topic is illuminate and shed a little bit of education about this topic. It's a bit of a taboo, and it's very easy to shy away from a conversation like this. And that's okay. Taboo topics can make us feel a little bit uncomfortable. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't address them. Because things like social media, we have no issues discussing its positives and negatives. But something like pornography, again, it's taboo. It might have as many consequences as does, for example, the impacts of social media. So that's what's in store for today's episode.
And we say taboo because it's not something we often do talk about, hear much about, especially in our adolescence. And weirdly enough, because it, is something that is quite common, in your puberty years, later years, it's a thing that a lot of us experience, if not all of us, or are introduced to at some point. And we don't hear much about it in school. So where do we get our learnings from it other than just the schoolyard and, the random kids who do introduce it? So this is why we're excited to talk about it. And we can't wait for you guys to get involved and we can't wait to hear what you guys have to think about it too.
So the first thing we want to kind of speak about is that we're coming here from an educational lens. Many young people will encounter pornography without understanding its potential effects and consequences. Understanding its potential effects, consequences can raise awareness, and it can have a flow-on effect for everyone's relationships, their mental health, and just their overall personal well-being. And just like we did with the social media episode, we're not going to be here to prescribe what people should and shouldn't do, whether to watch pornography or not, but to rather being aware of it as a tool that can help us navigate this topic. So the first point I want to kind of raise, and it's kind of an important one, is that pornography can often present unrealistic portrayals of sexual intimacy and relationships, and this can create really distorted expectations. So some people might ask, why would it create such a distorted viewpoint? So the first thing is, as young people, we tend to be really curious about sex. We tend to be really curious about the nitty-gritty of it. And these things aren't necessarily discussed in schools. We'll get the...
Not at all.
Well, I suppose we get those...
we have those sexual education classes here and there, but I remember my sexual education classes and, you're 14 years old at the time, and let's be real, you just take the mickey out of it as well. Like, it's the first time you hear the word sex in a public space, and everyone's like, hee 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 hee.
Yeah, and you hear your sports teacher speak about it, and it's like, it's so out of tune because you're so used to them teaching you or coaching you, and then they're speaking about, a very taboo topic.
Yeah, and also thinking back to my sex ed classes, I remember it was largely anonymous in how it was approached, which I understand because, not everyone, or especially at that age, you don't really have the tendency to be outspoken about it. But I remember the facilitators at the time facilitating the class with like a question box. And, if you had questions or queries or concerns, you would have to talk about it through this question box. So for half the class, it's, you writing something down on a leaflet, putting it in a box, and then they're just talking about it. Whereas I think if it came from the perspective or the approach of just the facilitator just talking about it, regardless of the laughter involved as such, it would be more welcomed and less laughed about at the time.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that sort of environment also makes us curious to know that nitty gritty. And often pornography, and especially video pornography, is what young people will tend to turn to try and model what behaviors they should emulate in their own intimate relationships. And the thing is, porn isn't designed as sex education. It's designed as entertainment. It's another form of entertainment, as is watching a movie, as is going to a theatre show. It's just different genre. It's a completely different mix, but the intent is entertainment.
So, Ilan, you did say that it can create unrealistic portrayals of sexual intimacy. Why?
Well, what you see in pornography oftentimes is a performance. They're actors. They're emulating a script, or rather reading off a script. Things like consent aren't really discussed. Very pertinent and important issues tend not to be glorified because maybe they're not sexy ideas to speak about.
Yeah.
So as young people, we are very impressionable. So you can look at, you can view a pornographic video and you might think, okay, the way that the two people were behaving in this video, that's standard for, sexual intimacy. That therefore must be how I shall behave. And a lot of young people might report that, especially if they have limited sexual experience. So when I mention that kind of flow-on effect, that's just one example of how it can come about.
I think the point you mentioned about consent is a big one. That's really not something that you ever see in a pornographic video. And that's something that probably should be the first thing that should be spoken about when discussing sexual encounters with someone is consent. So weird when you think about it as to why the porn industry doesn't show much about consent. Like we do understand that, yes, it's entertainment. We've said that. But if we are moving towards a society where, consent should always be a thing, but it's more so spoken about now and embedded now more than ever, as it should be, you would think that the industry would show that as well.
And I think that's been probably one of the main criticisms of the industry. And I think it does come back to what I said earlier, demonstrating consent can often traditionally be viewed as like a non-sexy idea, like it could kill the mood. That's not necessarily the case because, these sort of things, it's a prerequisite, and as it should be, right?
Yeah.
So I think, it's one of those things where we can fall into that trap. It's not a tutorial video. It's there for entertainment.
Yeah.
But yeah, look, some might ask like, okay, pornography, how widespread is the usage? And a 2018 study of 1,036 people aged 18 to 35 found that 98% of men and 73% of women reported engaging with internet pornography within the previous 6 months, with some studies suggesting that about 10% of all adults admitting to reporting an addiction to sexual content on the internet.
So if we weigh up those numbers there, 1,036 people, that is men and women. Let's just say that's, I don't know, just for the nature of the study, let's just say that's an all men study, even though it's not. But 10% of adults. Oh no, it's 10% of adults. I thought that was 10% of men. Okay, doesn't matter then. 10% of the 1,000 people. So essentially 100 people per study.
Correct.
Are reporting an addiction to it. That's massive.
And even more, that's for the addiction aspect, but just in general viewership. 98%. A 2020 survey, another additional 2020 survey of men across a range of Western European countries found that respondents reported watching an average of 70 minutes of online porn a week, with 2% watching more than 7 hours, which is an excessive amount. And there's this feminist author, her name is Louise Perry, and she actually has a quote that says, "The average man, it seems, spends more time watching pornography than he does showering." So that kind of just speaks to its relevance.
Yeah.
It might not be spoken about, right? But it is something that's quite prominent across the adult lifespan.
Which is why we're introducing these statistics, to just show that it is so relevant, it is so prominent. So, it is a taboo topic, but it's something that we encourage being spoken about because it is that relevant.
Exactly. So we mentioned and prefaced that pornography can be addictive, which is, I suppose, one of the potential drawbacks of it. Can you go into a little bit of depth as to why that might be the case?
Yeah, well, just like other things like drugs and alcohol and video games, the research says that porn triggers dopamine and the release of dopamine in the brain. And orgasms release all these different endorphins, just like, drugs would, alcohol would, exercise would for that matter. So it's kind of just like gambling. It's that instant gratification. It's that quick fix. It's that quick release of dopamine and that release of endorphins. So, if we're sitting and viewing a large quantity of porn and we're constantly releasing that dopamine and getting that endorphin hit and that rush, it's going to cause us the likelihood of, being more, it's more readily available to us. So we're more likely to do it than going out in the wide world and trying to fulfill like a sexual, intimate relationship with someone, because, why can't you just sit behind a screen and get that instant gratification? It's just so much more convenient. You don't need to go out there and chase it, essentially.
Yeah, it's almost like a very small titrated dose, right? So, because on the neurochemical level, as you just said, it activates that reward center, similar to what any other substance abuse or gambling addiction might do. Some might ask, what actually defines a pornographic addiction? And look, I'm not sure if there's a specific metric, but there are probably a few questions that could be asked. So
probably like the inability to quit, like inability to just cease watching it.
Correct. Progressing to more extreme forms of pornography to find pleasure, because, the initial viewership, you might become at least sensitized to it. Even hiding pornographic habits from your partner, excessive spending on pornographic material, sometimes at the expense of, other financial necessities, and even consuming pornographic material at risky times and moments.
Yeah, and I think that point about progressing to more extreme forms of pornography to find pleasure really resembles why it can be dangerous, because essentially, as the research says, your brain is getting used to releasing that dopamine and releasing those endorphins from, surface level stuff. And then once that surface level stuff becomes too surface level or mainstream, essentially, it needs that bigger hit to release that same amount of dopamine, which is so dangerous for when you do find yourself one day in a sexual encounter with someone, because it might not have the same effect as what you might get from watching porn. And that's a really dangerous situation to be in.
Yeah, and it's really important to be aware of that. And I suppose it's a very similar case of, getting hooked on specific drugs and developing a tolerance. So you have to keep increasing your dose so you're able to get that same level of kick.
It's like that gateway, just like we talk about, a gateway drug into something heavier. It's the same thing here.
No, for sure. And look, addictions, no matter the vehicle, it can be quite detrimental for other areas of your life. And look, pornographic addiction one of the most cited consequences is to do with, interpersonal relationships, especially partners, men and women. For a study that kind of looked at it as of the consequences, men tend to pull away emotionally from their significant other. Another one is they might start developing secretive traits, and they may even fall into depressive states. And maybe it's correlational, but there is some sort of, I'm sure there is some sort of mechanisms at play that kind of increase those likelihoods.
These are really big consequences. And again, we're not sitting here to scare anyone about it, but rather to just spread the awareness of the situation, considering, we saw those statistics that essentially, 1 in 10 people do develop a porn addiction. So it's really important to just be aware of these consequences after all, and know that, if you do find yourself essentially maybe spending too much time on it, or using it as a way to negate doing other things in your life, then it's important to just be aware of that, acknowledge that, and then take that next step as to how to counteract that, because you don't want to fall into this trap.
Exactly. And I think I just mentioned before that kind of those correlational stats where people might fall into depressive states, they can pull away emotionally from their significant other. Some explaining, some things that may explain that relationship is that often the partner that pulls away, even if in a relationship where the significant other is okay with their partner engaging in pornographic material. For example, the partner might start feeling low self-esteem, right? If people with a porn addiction may also place an unhealthy amount of pressure on their performance during intercourse, which can significantly affect their sexual confidence, right?
Yeah. Which is something we see too much of in like, you know, a pornographic video.
Correct.
Is that like performance is something that seems like it just comes with absolute ease. You know, they could be engaging in sexual intercourse or any sexual activity for a long period of time. Little do we know, you know, how many stimulants they may be on, how long they've been doing it for throughout the day. Like these are all contextual, you know,
factors to be accounted for.
To be accounted for that we aren't aware of, and why it can cause so much danger as to, you know, once we might have sexual encounters and we don't find that our performance lives up to that of what we've witnessed before, and we go, fuck, like, why not? Like, and then it puts you into this state of, will I ever reach that? Am I ever going to have that same level of performance?
And it's interesting because there's a related point that says that, you know, as a consequence, you know, if you're engaging in a copious amount of pornographic kind of content, you might find that your own sex life becomes less satisfying because, as you said, you become so desensitized and you get that titrated dose of internet pornography that you don't get the same dopamine fix as you would from, you know, a sexual
just
encounter.
With your sexual partner.
And it's completely different things. I think there's different parts of the brain that are actually activated during those things. But even irrespective of a partner or not, it can, you know, having something like this as an addiction can obviously affect your daily functioning. So always seeking that instant dopamine fix can impair productivity. Just like you would if you're scrolling social media and you know you have to get down to studying or you have to get some work done. It's again, no matter the medium or the vehicle, it can really, really kind of have that effect on your daily functioning. Exactly.
And look, it's not all doom and gloom. There is maybe some things that we can learn from pornographic content. That may be, you know, potentially watching pornographic material or being exposed to it can enable someone to maybe explore their sexuality or explore things that they might be interested in sexually that they never thought they might previously be into. And that could add spice to a relationship or to a interaction with someone that they might want to be sexual with, and that could have real positive effects for them.
Well, it's similar, again, I keep harping on this point, but it's a bit of that yin-yang effect, yin-yang relationship, because when we spoke about social media, it definitely has its benefits.
Yeah.
Right? If it was all doom and gloom, it wouldn't be as popular as it is.
Yeah,
correct?
Exactly. It wouldn't be such a taboo topic.
And just before kind of speaking about the potential positives, it is important to kind of encourage that, you know, there's nothing wrong with seeking treatment or getting help for this, because just like anything else, could be classified as an addiction, as would, you know, being addicted to alcohol, drugs, social media. You can get treatment for that sort of thing, and there's absolutely no shame.
Yeah.
And it should be encouraged. But
we have spoken about the potential factors that might cause or might, you know, enable someone to potentially think that they might be at that stage where they might need to seek treatment. What do you think are the potential treatment interventions that might be appropriate for something like this? Would it be more so like directing your attention to something else, or just going cold turkey? What do you reckon?
I'm not sure the exact specific treatments, but I think just having an awareness of why you're engaging in the pornographic material in the excess that you are. You know, is it feeling some sort of void in your life? Because oftentimes you are chasing that dopamine fix. I think sometimes, and this point, I remember we mentioned it earlier, but just going and progressing into more kind of, what was the term? More severe forms of pornography, because that initial dopamine fix isn't enough. What that kind of highlights is that sometimes individuals aren't even that entertained by what they're viewing. They're just doing it just to get that fix.
I think that's such a good point.
So it's similar to those who are heavily addicted to certain substances.
Yeah, they don't enjoy the actual act of doing it. It's the feeling they feel.
It's almost
the release of the hormones, the neurotransmitters.
Correct, and almost to just feel better from the withdrawal effects.
Yeah.
So I think there has to be a really important distinction there.
So maybe a form of treatment then is actually like.
I mean, I'm not a psychologist, so I can't really tell you what the evidence-based treatment would be.
Of course, but this is just discussion at the end of the day. And, I think we've raised a good point there that it's not the act as to why people want to do it. It's the feeling they get from it. So maybe it's about educating that you can get that same feeling essentially by doing other actions that, are actually better for you, such as exercising as for one.
And I think that's the thing. If you look at it as a tool and say, okay, what void is it potentially filling? Is this a healthy way of feeling it? Is this a maladaptive response? I think that can go a long way, because I think sometimes you can get, if someone is struggling with pornographic addiction, they might not actually be aware. And look, awareness isn't the cure. It's not, but it's a good starting step. But again, we're not professionals here. We're here to kind of illuminate and kind of facilitate a discussion about this topic. But there's no harm in seeking assistance, professional assistance, that is, for that sort of thing. But look, you said it earlier, there are some positives that can come about from it, especially from an intimacy setting. The reality is we're not going to shy away from it. Sexual needs are a very legitimate human need.
Of course.
Just like, maybe not to the same extent as, eating, maintaining a regulated body temperature.
Arguably it could be, though. Arguably it could be.
Potentially.
As humans,
I got to look at the Maslow's hierarchy of needs for that one.
But yeah, as humans, we've got sexual desires and sexual needs, essentially. And it's something that I think needs to be fulfilled probably just as much as anything else. And
that speaks to why pornography is that popular, is because it does, in a way, create, I'd say, sexual exploration for people. It allows them to
explore what they're into.
It can normalize certain fantasies that people have. And I think when something's a bit taboo, it can be a little bit more exciting. It can be a bit more, why not engage with it? Because it's not the norm. It's a little bit unfamiliar. People like to explore that sort of thing. We're humans. We're curious minds. And again, said it at the start, it is an entertainment platform. So assuming you're using it in a safe way, it's not affecting your daily functioning, then just like anything else, do what you will with it.
Exactly. So maybe then it shouldn't be something that should be so frowned upon, because that's the kind of perception that I've always grown up with, thinking about, porn and, just pornographic material in general. And that's probably how society ingrains us to think of it as well, right? So maybe it shouldn't be something that should be perceived that way, but rather something that should be, just spoken about more with the perception that, just like anything else, as long as you do it or, entertain yourself with it in moderation, that's okay.
Yeah, I suppose, again, it kind of goes back to what we said before. If you know how to use it as a kind of useful tool, there is no harm with it. I think, though, this is like the really important point about young people. We said it earlier, but I think, again, just emphasizing it's really important. It's very hard to deliver an interactive workshop that's full of education for young people to fully grasp it. Because things like these are, you can't, on one hand, you can't have a textbook that explains everything to you about how to be, a good sexual partner. And
that's the whole beauty of life, is just sometimes you have to just experience things for yourself. Nobody can tell you what to do and how to do it. You have to be that one in the driver's seat.
Exactly. And we often find that those topics where you don't actually have a textbook for, they're the ones that are most interesting to speak about, because only life experiences will illuminate that.
That's where people want the most answers. Like there's all these books and podcasts and TikToks about, relationships and breakups and things like that. But we're so addicted to watching that and consuming that material because everyone's situation is unique. It's so grey. It's not black and white, is it? And this is just another one of those topics that falls into that category.
And I think the biggest misconception is that pornography is sex. And it's not. Again, oftentimes in pornographic material, it is performative, and very much so it doesn't encompass the same sort of, the love and the emotional intimacy that you would have with a partner, irrespective if you're, no matter what relationship, like whether it's a heterosexual or homosexual relationship. it doesn't account for that sort of thing. And I think
Exactly.
that's really, really important. What would you say is kind of our closing message for this sort of topic?
Yeah, I think just like our closing message for most other topics, it's all really interrelatable. And that being just be aware of the effects of it. You know, we're not saying go cold turkey on it. We don't condone it. Don't engage with it. Maybe even the contrary. Like, we've spoken about the benefits of it and why it can be advantageous for young people to just get an understanding of and be aware of. So rather than, you know, us denigrating it, we kind of are just encouraged to acknowledge it and just be aware of it, just like anything else, and utilize it in moderation, if you will. But, you know, if you are feeling like you might be at a level that might be quite excessive, speak to a friend about it, speak to someone you feel close to about it, maybe even external help. Doesn't necessarily need to be a family member, because, you know, I feel like talking to a family member about something like this might feel quite intrusive in a way. But don't be ashamed of speaking up about it, because I think it's something that isn't verbalized as much as it should be. And we can really learn a lot from someone just by voicing our opinions about it and by, discussing our own experiences with it.
And I mean, that's what I kind of like about our show, is that we're not prescribing anyone does anything. But what we are saying is, this is what the situation is. This is all the information. You know, go out and do your own research as well. By all means, we'd encourage that for sure.
And like we just said, it's very much a taboo topic, but one where it can probably become less taboo. You know, if we do speak about this a little bit more in our social settings, we can change the perception of what it really is normally perceived as.
No, definitely. On that note, I hope you guys enjoyed. If there's anyone who would benefit from listening to this, please don't hesitate in sharing this podcast episode with them. If you did enjoy this and you want similar content to this that does tackle those taboo topics, don't hesitate in emailing us, reaching out.
Yeah, Instagram DMs are always open too, so shoot us through your topic suggestions. We love hearing your topic suggestions.
And look, the reality is we actually enjoy speaking about these uncomfortable topics, because we know that the topics where you have to be the most vulnerable can often have sometimes the most benefit to people.
Yeah.
Because it's hard to talk about. They really are. So again, keep them coming. If there's any specific topic you guys want us to hone in on that might seem a little bit taboo, let us know. We're more than happy to discuss it.
Let us know. Exactly. All right, guys. That is everything from us for now. So happy Tuesday, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.